Barcelona is a very old city. Its history is so long that it is said to stretch back to the mists of time. It can be measured not in centuries, but in thousands of years. We are not going back so far. Only until a time that is almost within living memory, when Barcelona was encircled by a wall that, like a straitjacket, enclosed a city full of vitality that was striving to expand and grow. In the mid-19th century, Barcelona finally demolished the wall that stifled it and spread rapidly across the surrounding plain in accordance with Ildefons Cerdà's plans for urban development. The execution of these plans would enable the old and unhealthy city to breathe again. Based on principles of hygiene and a radical rationality, the new development would give rise to the Eixample as we know it today. More and more townhouses quickly sprang up along the brand-new spacious boulevards. As the city grew and new services and better infrastructures appeared, Barcelona attracted ever more tradespeople, industrialists, and professionals, and above all, the bourgeoisie, whether those belonging to the minor nobility or prosperous industrialists, including the so-called Indianos, nouveau riches with fortunes acquired overseas, were all eager to show off their elevated social standing. So they settled in the heart of the new Eixample, and there erected their palaces, buildings designed by the most outstanding and prestigious architects belonging to the Modernist movement, which was the prevailing style at that time. This was how the Catalan bourgeoisie contributed decisively to shaping the city's singular character and physiognomy that we see today. The Casa Lleó y Morera is one of the finest examples of this development. The building was commissioned by its owner Francesca Morera y Ortiz, who in 1902 charged the architect Domenech y Montaner with drawing up the plans for the site, until then occupied by the old Casa Rocamora on Passeig de Gràcia 35. It took 4 years to complete the construction. Unfortunately, Francesca Morera died before the building was finished, and it was her son, the physician Albert Lleó y Morera, who oversaw its construction and gave his name to the house, which remained in the family for the next 40 years. The facade of the building not only reflects the social status of the owners, but also their aesthetic taste and their socio-cultural values. It is therefore no accident that on the balconies of the first floor, we find 4 sculptures, the work of Eusebi Arnau, which are allegories of the 4 most notable inventions of that time: electricity, the telephone, the gramophone, and photography. And it's precisely photography we wish to talk about now, since the ground floor of the building, where the city ordinances stipulated that some type of industrial or commercial activity should be conducted, was to house what would become the studio of Pau Arduard, the best-known photographer of the period. Needless to say, these facilities at street level do not detract in the least from the spirit of the building or the personality of its owners. Quite the contrary. Unfortunately, they changed hands over the years, and the sculptures of 2 feminine figures that adorned the entrance eventually disappeared. Returning now to the building itself, one unusual feature stands out: the upper floors, where at that time tenants or domestic servants were lodged, still retain the same constructive rigor and aesthetic quality as the main floor, which is where the owners used to live. This main floor is the one we visit now. Shared by all the occupants of the house, the vestibule, just like the stairway, is abundantly decorated with reproductions of flowers from the mulberry tree, Morera in Catalan, in honor of the owner's surname, as well as boasting that great novelty of the period, a lift. As soon as we cross the threshold, we are aware not only of the high social standing of the owners, but also of their artistic taste, which, like all the rest of the building, clearly belongs to the purest modernist style. We now enter the area reserved for visitors, beginning with the great salon, with its enormous windows that look directly out onto the Passeig de Gràcia, which without doubt is the principal and most sophisticated avenue in the entire Eixample. It is in this room where we begin to appreciate the supreme skill of the workmanship, more than 40 craftsmen in total, who worked on the decoration of the interior of the Casa Lleó y Morera under the supervision of Domenech y Montaner. On the one hand, we have what at the time was the innovative flooring and parquet, while on the other, there is the marquetry on the walls and ceiling, the work of Gaspar Omar, who achieved an unmatchable peak of artistic perfection and craftsmanship. One look at the deep reliefs in the coffered ceiling is ample proof of this. Neither should we overlook the applications in gold leaf on the incrustations in pink marble or the reliefs on the walls. If, as we have said, that the Passeig de Gràcia was the busiest and most elegant avenue in the Eixample, the spectacle it provided to the eye at that time must also have been worth seeing. It is precisely for that reason that the rotunda that juts out over the street was built, from where one would have seen through the fine wrought iron latticework the comings and goings of neighbors and acquaintances. Inside the rotunda itself, we find the fireplace, the heat from which was retained by the partitions, also the work of Gaspar Omar, with Art Deco stained glass windows that were a later addition. The fireplace was originally flanked by 2 benches, from where one could also observe the people going in and out of the 2 adjacent salons. Still in the area devoted to visitors and guests, we now find the billiard room, which also includes spaces for music, games, and other leisure activities. As in the main salon we have just visited, this room also has large windows and decorative features of exquisite refinement. Now let's retrace our steps a little to the main room and look upwards. At the level of the ceiling, we find a series of sculptures, all by Eusebi Arnau, that represent the popular song La Dida de l'Infant Rei. This is taken from an ancient legend that tells of how the Virgin Mary returned to life the infant king who had burned to death after his wet nurse fell asleep. A tragic story with a happy ending, probably chosen by the owners after the death of their newborn child. Going a little further, we come to the hallway, next to the large skylight that gives light and ventilation to the apartment. Recall the concern for hygiene that characterized modernism. This hallway separated the soi-disant public part from the private area, where the families spent their time together. Particularly remarkable are the magnificent Roman mosaics that decorate the floor, the work of the Italian Mario Maragliano. On the threshold of the corridor, we find a sculpture of St. George, the patron saint of Catalonia, and an emblematic figure in Catalan history and culture. It marks the entrance to the private area of the house. After this, we come to the bedrooms with their ensuite bathrooms, the domestic service areas, and the dining room, which leads to the rotunda at the back, and then to the courtyard of the house. If there's one place where the images speak for themselves, it's here. On one side, the expressive moldings in mosaic with porcelain reliefs which, in an incipient impressionist style, represents the family's excursions into the countryside. This is a collective work by Lluís Bru, Josep Pey, Joan Carreras, Antoni Serra, and Mario Maragliano. On the other side, the spectacular stained glass windows by Antoni Rigalt that represent the tree of life. If we go outside, we can see how these stained glass windows rise to the very top of the building, underlining the criterion exclusive to the Casa Lleó y Morera, that all the floors, even those for rent, should fulfill the same standards of building excellence and artistic quality. To the rear of the courtyard, we find the old wash house, with a large mulberry tree outlined on the wall in sgraffito, although this is a faithful replica made to replace the original work. Of the more than 40 artists and craftsmen who contributed to the decoration and ornamentation of the Casa Lleó y Morera, including the design of the furniture, we wish to mention the following: Eusebi Arnau, sculptor; Gaspar Omar, furniture designer; Joan Carreras, sculptor and stonemason; Lluís Bru, mosaicist; Antoni Serra, painter and ceramicist; Antoni Jujol, sculptor; Mario Maragliano, mosaicist; Antoni Rigalt, painter, designer, and stained glass artist; Josep Pey, decorator, designer, and painter; Joan Segarra, woodcarver and furniture designer. And first and foremost, with his comprehensive vision of all the arts, the brilliant modernist architect Lluis Domenech y Montaner. two of whose works have been declared as human heritage sites by UNESCO: the Palau de la Música Catalana and the Hospital de la Santa Creu y Santa Pau. Furthermore, the Casa Lleó y Morera was distinguished by Barcelona City Hall with the award for the best artistic building erected in 1905. In addition to the Casa Lleó y Morera, Núñez y Navarro has recovered other heritage buildings of Barcelona, like the Torre Andreu, also known as La Rotonda, the Torre Enric Serra, the former Societat del Crèdit Mercantil, the old factory Géneros de Punto Farrés, or the current hotels 1898 and Gran Via. Altogether, throughout its 65-year-old history, this company has made an important contribution to the recovery and preservation of much of the most representative architectural heritage in Barcelona, overcoming great challenges in order to restore and refurbish buildings for shared use, as well as recovering catalog parts and restoring newly constructed areas to their original condition.